Welcome to my music room in sunny California. Well, all I can say is, wow, what a week this has been in terms of announcements for the classical music lover, the classical music collector, the audiophile, vinyl lovers, anyone who's into classical music, done right, mastered AAA onto vinyl. What a week we're having. So I just wanted to jump in here and make a few quick comments about all the news that's been breaking over the last week. The first thing that we heard about was that Chad Kassem over at Acoustic Sounds Analog Productions has announced a new run of the RCA Living Stereo series, but this time he's doing 45 RPM cuts. Now most of these are being cut from the original metal parts done by Bernie Grundman back in the 90s for Classic Records. Quick history lesson here. RCA Living Stereo, considered amongst the very finest sounding records of the golden age of stereo, starting in the mid to late 50s going through to the 60s. And those records are highly sought after in their original pressings. Then along came Chesky Records, which did a limited number of re-releases of these, again mastered all analog. And then really the first big re-release campaign happened with Classic Records in the 90s. They started bringing out all these titles, first of all in 33, mastered by Bernie Grundman, but then as 45s, mastered by Bernie Grundman. Now, the interesting thing is that opinions over the years have changed as regards to the sound of these classic reissues. Initially welcomed with open arms, then there was a little bit of a backlash saying they're a little bit too bright, too detailed. But then in recent years, and I'm talking now about the 33s, in recent years, opinion has been coming around to say, well, actually, they do sound really good. I've actually got all those classic 33s, and I've always really liked them, except for a few of the very earliest titles, which to me were a little bit bright and a little bit almost too congested in some of the climaxes. But in general, I really liked the Classic Records versions. They had a kind of energy to them that I really responded to. And then Bernie Grundman started cutting a bunch of titles at 45 RPM. And it's my understanding that between him doing the 33s and the 45s, there were some upgrades in his mastering chain. And there's no doubt in my mind that in general the 45s do sound superior. Now they were all released as single-sided discs, and I've got a couple of sets here to show you. This is my set of the famous Fritz Reiner Lieutenant Kijé and the Stravinsky Song of the Nightingale, which is actually, I think, one of the main reasons to get this set. I mean, the Kijé is fantastic, a classic, but the Song of the Nightingale, which is not so well known, is also brilliant. And as you can see, in this particular version, each of the 4 records still has the regular sleeve. Another set that I have here is of the classic pictures at an exhibition. And again, it's 4 LPs, all of which are in main covers. Some of the others, I've got a clutch of other ones. They were released with just the first record being in the sleeve, and then the other 3 records were put in a blank white sleeve. And like I say, they're all single-sided, and part of the problem there, quite apart from the 45 issue of having to get up twice as often as you would actually have to take the record off, put it into the sleeve and get another record. But there's no doubt in my mind that these 45 pressings sounded amazing. Okay, fast forward. Chad Kassem at Analog Productions buys up Classic Records as Mike Hobson goes out of business, retires, and he buys all the assets. And included in that is all the run of 45 RPM plates, etc. So what he did first was he reissued a whole bunch of the earlier titles, the 33s. He did them at 33, but I think in nearly every case he commissioned new masterings from Ryan K. Smith. And the results were that they had a slightly different kind of sound to the classic versions. Hard to characterize. I would say a slightly less detailed picture, but a smoother sound, maybe a lusher sound. So for many people, it got closer to the sound of the original pressings for 1S pressings. I just think they all sound great. In certain cases, I have both the Analog Productions versions and the Classic Records versions, and I listen to both. I will say that in the case of some titles, maybe I would slightly veer towards the classic versions, and here I'm talking about the 33s. But there's no doubt that the classic 45s really had an extra something. So what started happening was about a year ago, those 33s, which had been around in the Acoustic Sounds Analog Productions catalog for about 10 years, they started going out of print. And a fellow YouTuber, a wonderful guy called Scott Wilson, who has a channel called The Pressing Matters, he started chronicling this process of, oh, you better get this one before it goes out of print, and this one goes out of print. I urge everyone, it's a great channel, and he covers not just classical, but all kinds of other records. And it was quite amusing to watch. And actually, I myself, I had been waiting and waiting to pick up those records. And then I just rapidly tried to get them. I missed a couple, which I'm really upset about. But then those of us sort of on the inside a little bit in this world, I found myself talking to Chad. He was saying he was considering doing the 45s. And I had, to be honest, I had mixed feelings about it, because I thought, oh, why not do some 33s? But then the more I thought about it, I thought, well, no, because what's going on right now is because of the success of the original Source series from Deutsche Grammophon, people are really coming back to classical. And I thought, well, you know, with these titles going out of print, here's an opportunity to get them at these wonderful Bernie Grundman masterings at 45. Now, here's another reason to get excited about this, because in all honesty, at the time at which some of these classic records 45s were being pressed, some of the quality of the actual pressings was variable, to say the least. They could be much more ticky and poppy, and other faults. So my copies are all really good, but I know some people have problems. But Chad now has his own pressing plot, QRP, Quality Record Pressings, and I think that these really fine sounding Bernie Grundman 45 cuts, cut with the higher quality, more reliable pressing quality, I think these might be definitive in terms of sonics. Now, yes, you have to deal with a 45 RPM issue. It's a trade-off. Certain pieces, certain records, it's less of an issue than others. If you've got a number of pieces with separate movements and you can split it up from side to side, I have no trouble getting up and changing records frequently, except for the fact that with classical music, there is a flow. If you're listening to a whole symphony, a whole side, like the Bartók music with strings, percussion, and celeste, the whole piece is more or less, well, actually on that record it is split over two sides. I think it is a little bit. One of the movements is on the other side. But it's nice to have a complete through line. So that's very much up to individuals. There are also some titles which are not being cut from Bernie Grundman metalwork because they weren't done by him back in the day. And for some detail on that, I'm not going to go into all that now, but I recommend two very good videos. One is done by my colleague from Tracking Angle, Michael Johnson, whose channel is called Poetry on Plastic, and he did a very good initial reaction to this series and a breakdown of it. And I would urge you to go to his channel, also to look at his videos. He started a series of videos where he's working his way through the entire Living Stereo catalog, talking about the records, the different versions, etc. Check out his video, and then go over to Scott Wilson's channel, Pressing Matters, because Scott did a great hour-long interview with Chad this last weekend, and they covered all the detail of these releases, which ones are mastered by people other than Bernie Grundman. So those will both give you some extra information. How am I feeling about this? I slightly mixed. I would have been very, very excited to see some new titles done at 33. There are many great classic records titles which have never been done by AP, and I'm thinking in particular of something like Clair de Lune, which is, I think, one of the most gorgeous records ever made. I have the 33 classic. I know there was a 45. It's very expensive. To see that redone would be wonderful. And there's a bunch of other great records in the classic lineup. And then beyond that, there would be some great records to have. But I understand why Chad is doing it this way. The other thing that's very attractive about this is these are going to be in beautiful gatefolds with a matte finish, which is a little different. And it's 2 records. You're not having to deal with the 4 records. And there are definitely some of these I'm picking up. I'm picking up the Rubinstein Brahms First Piano Concerto, which I never got. I'm definitely grabbing the Bartók Music for Strings, Percussion and Celeste. It's one of my favorite records of all time. I only have the 33 in both classic and AP. I do not have the classic 45. It's a spectacular sounding record of some of my favorite music. I'm definitely getting that. And there's definitely a bunch of others I'm going to pick up. So I think this is a really exciting development and fantastic that Chad is doing it. I'm hopeful that if the series does well, he might be inspired to go and do some of the other 45s that Bernie Grundman cut, like the La Siena suites, and there's a few others. Slightly less often done, but it would be great to have those. Again, Scott, I believe, has pretty much a full run of all the Bernie Grundman classic 45. So if you go back on his channel and look at some of his older videos talking about different versions of certain RCA Living Stereo titles, then you can get a sense of some of these other records that are out there. I'm just hoping that Chad does really well with this series and that it inspires him to keep going in some form or other. I will mention that there is a special offer that if you subscribe to all 25 titles, you will get each one at $5 off and with free shipping. So I think for newer collectors, those who haven't been around like us old fogies, who've got all these different versions but are coming new to this catalog, I think this is a no-brainer. I think picking these up is a really great way to go. They're going to sound fantastic. I have no doubt about it. The combination of Bernie Grundman's 45 mastering, which was always superior, with the high quality pressing that Chad can do now, I think it's a no-brainer. But as if that wasn't enough, more news just broke. And it's very, very exciting indeed. I'm talking about the Decca Pure Analog series. Okay, rewind. I'm just going to set this up. I just posted a video, or yes, I think I should have just posted it, talking about the latest Deutsche Grammophon Original Source series. I talked about this record. I talked about this record, Vigilel's Lyric Pieces, and then there are going to be 2 more in the next batch. We've got here this wonderful chamber music record of Rostropovich and Marta Argerich together. Oh, that's going to be great. I haven't listened to it yet, got to listen to it. And then this is a stone cold classic. Giolini doing the pictures in an exhibition. I'm so excited to hear this. This has actually long been my favorite recording of this. Yes, I know the Rhino is spectacular, but there's something about that record that I've always loved. Now, so let me just set the scene. When the original Source series debuted just over 2 years ago, it was the first time that a classical label itself had decided to go down the route of doing all analog AAA from the master tapes, analog recordings, analog mixing, mastering, cutting, and doing their own reissues. Up to that point, it had always been other companies doing it. Like I was just explaining with the RCA Living Stereos, and Classic Records also did some of the Mercury catalog and the Columbia catalog. Then you had Speaker's Corner doing their reissues. You had Analog Productions doing their reissues. I actually wrote a couple of articles about this just over a year ago, I think it was, in Tracking Angle. I'll put links to those. And I also made a couple of associated videos talking about really this whole question of why aren't the majors themselves going into their catalogs and doing this properly. They were all sort of jumping on the vinyl bandwagon by doing vinyl versions of back catalogs, certain back catalog titles, but mastered from digital files. And these were really not what we were all after. We wanted the real deal, mastered from the master tapes, all analog, etc., etc. What was so interesting about the Deutsche Grammophon series was that Deutsche Grammophon never really had a reputation as an audiophile label with really good quality sound. Well, what we learned was that actually these tapes were so much better sounding than we ever thought. And for the series, they focused on the 1970s, when, again, no one knew this, Deutsche Grammophon was actually recording in surround sound. Both their 4-track and 8-track sessions would have 2 tracks recorded with room mics, so you would get that ambient sound. But when it came to issuing the records at the time, they would do a mix down to a stereo tape, and then they would compromise the sound even further by, in order to get uniformity at all the different pressing plants around the world and make sure the pressings were all good, they actually dialed down some of the dynamics, etc. So what you were hearing on the records of the time was not what was on the master tape, far from it. So for example, piano sound did not always sound as full-bodied as was actually on the master tapes. So the genius of Rainer Maillard at Emil Berliner Studios, who's long been pushing for vinyl and doing his direct-to-disc recordings with the Berlin Philharmonic, etc., he finally persuaded Deutsche Grammophon to embark on a proper AAA vinyl reissue program, and he developed the technology at Emil Berliner Studios so that they could master and cut directly from the fully edited 4 and then later 8-track master tapes. So, I mean, the level of purity in the mastering chain was something we'd never heard before at all. So the success of that series, I think, inspired Decca to do what they're now doing. Now, Decca's a slightly different case from Deutsche Grammophon. Decca has always been considered an audiophile label from the very beginning, from the mono records, the stereo records, even going into the digital era. They were considered an audiophile label. They developed the so-called famous so-called Decca tree, a very purist way of recording, with a stand with several microphones just behind the conductor, a minimalist approach, mimicking to a degree or doing at the same time something similar to the purist approach of Mercury Living Presence and RCA Living Stereo in America. But Decca had not been doing AAA reissues. Well, I don't know what happened, and we're going to do a big conversation with the folks at Deutsche Grammophon and Decca in about a month or two before the records are actually released. Maybe we'll find out some more information. But I got word almost 2 months ago that Decca had decided to go and do its own version of the Deutsche Grammophon original source series. And it is so exciting. They are going to use Rainer Maillard and Emil Berliner Studios. Sidney Meyer will be cutting them again. And because it's all part of UMG, there's no problem getting to the master tapes. And they're going to dive not only into the Decca catalog, which is exciting enough, they're going to dive into the Philips catalog too. Philips is essentially now defunct. It's been absorbed by Decca, but it was part of Polygram and all of that. So the first batch of releases have been announced, and I wrote a long article in Tracking Angle, which came out in the last day or two. And you can go and read up all the details, but I thought I'd tell you a little bit about it here. So the first title they announced is this one, Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, Sir George Solti with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. This has always been considered one of the best recordings of the Rite of Spring. This is an original pressing. I think it was also reissued by Speaker's Corner. You can see there it's a wideband label from the 70s. I think this was recorded in the 70s, I'm pretty sure. Yes, 74. And one of the engineers on this is, you know, the famous Kenneth Wilkinson. I mean, the Decca engineering teams were incredible. Now, this is just a regular 2-track tape, but it's going to be released in 45 RPM, which makes no difference because the sides are short, so you're just flipping the record as often as you would for a 33, but the extra 45 is going to give you so much more sound, and I have every confidence that Rainer Meyer and Sidney Meyer are just going to master and cut the hell out of this. I mean, I think, look, they're an extraordinary team, but I just want to tip my hat yet again. I think the secret weapon is Sidney Claire Meyer. She is just leading the field in terms of creating incredibly dynamic vinyl cuts. And I'm hearing from other friends who've bought some of her records of other kinds of music that they sound equally dynamic and exciting. So, I mean, letting them loose on this, it's going to be so thrilling. And yes, I know some of you are going to say, oh, well, they did the Abbado, Rite of Spring. Why would I need to get this one in the original Source series? And yes, that Rite of Spring is fantastic. But my feeling is you can never have too many versions of the Rite of Spring. It's such a thrilling piece, and it always pushes engineers to their best work. So that's very exciting. Now we get to something else which is very exciting indeed. Remember this record? Older collectors will remember this. This is the first commercially released digital recording done by Decca. It came out in 1979. It's of the New Year's concert in Vienna. This is when the Vienna Philharmonic is together with, at that time, he was the lead concertmaster of the orchestra, Willy Boskowski, but he also had a conducting career. And he'd been releasing a whole series of records with the VPO of Strauss and his contemporaries, a wonderful series of records on Decca, most of which I have, and are simply glorious and definitive versions of this repertoire, however much you might like some of the others, like some of the Karajan's and the Carlos Kleibers, you know, and even going back to, there's a wonderful record of Ferenc Fritzsche doing Strauss on Deutsche Grammophon. But this was the first all-digital recording. It was a big, big deal. I went and got this immediately. Interestingly, I cleaned this up a couple of years ago, and it actually sounds really good. Decca was able to do digital about as well as anyone at this period. I would say the only people to rival them were probably Telarc and Denon. Was not a fan of Deutsche Grammophon digital, although in the Karajan Bruckner symphony set, the first 3 symphonies were done all digital, and Rainer Meyer cleaned those up beautifully. Also, these are later digital recordings, the box set of Giolini doing Bruckner last 3 symphonies, those were digital. They sound great as well, with all the magic that Rainer has done in his remixing and remastering. But generally Decca was the best. But here's the thing, because it was an early technology, they recorded the whole thing with an analog backup. And Dominic Fife, who is the head of Decca Records, the A&R head, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about him in a moment. He went back into the vaults and he found the analog master tape backup of this, pristine, untouched, and that's what they're using to release this. So I think you're going to get all the benefits of the fantastic recording in and of itself, where they have the microphones placed, etc. You're going to get all of that, but then you're going to get that extra analog richness. This is so exciting. This has got some wonderful tracks on it. I'm just going to mention, and I mentioned this in my piece on Tracking Angle, which you must look up. I'll put the link below. The Pizzicato polka is sensational, and at the Hunt polka, where they have gunshots going off, the whole audience jumps and laughs. It's great. And then for my money, the last two tracks, which are the way they always end these concerts, is with the Blue Danube Waltz and then the Radetzky March, where the audience starts clapping along and the conductor has to keep them in order. These are two of my favorite versions, if not my favorite versions. And to hear this all analog is going to be sensational. And then what is so exciting is that Dominic has revealed that all these early digital recordings by Decca were recorded with analog backups. So they're going to go back into that early digital catalog, which includes some true gems. I mean, can you imagine some of the Charles Dutoit Montreal Symphony Orchestra recordings released from the analog backups? I mean, do they have an analog backup of his version of Daphnis and Chloe by Ravel, which even in its digital version is one of my favorites. It's one of the benchmarks. Can you imagine that mastered from analog? I don't know if that exists, but it's a thought to conjure with. So that's another stream. So they're basically saying there are three streams of where they're going hunting in the archives. One is the regular 2-track tapes from Decca, which are beautifully recorded. Then you've got the analog backups of early digital recordings. And now the big surprise, which is they're going to do this record. This is from Philips, and this is from Colin Davis's benchmark cycle of the Sibelius symphonies, recorded in Symphony Hall, Boston, with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, Symphonies 5 and 7. 5 is one of the most well-known of the Sibelius symphonies, one of the most accessible. 7th, much lesser known, but a really beautiful piece. And here's the thing. What Dominic discovered was that Philips, like Deutsche Grammophon, was recording in surround. So this is going to be mastered from the 4-track mastered tapes. In other words, it's just going to be like one of the Deutsche Grammophon original source series records, with all that extra ambient information to create a huge sound stage. And then they're going to spread it, instead of just a 2-sided record, they're spreading it to 4 sides, and they're adding in Sibelius's tone poem Tapiola for Good Measure, a beautiful piece of music. I am so excited about this, the thought that they're going into the Philips catalog. Unfortunately, the rest of the Colin Davis cycle, I've got 2 of them here. The Sibelius, this one is number 1, and Symphony number 2. These were not recorded in surround, but actually these are great. You should pick them up. They're wonderful sounding records. Philips records are amongst the best sounding records you can find in the bargain bins for next to nothing. I paid a couple of dollars for each of these. They sound really, really good, and I've become a big Philips collector in the last sort of 15 years. And you can see on my channel I did some videos, gems from the Philips catalog. But this is so exciting that they're doing this double LP of the Colin Davis Sibelius symphonies, mastered from multi-track tape. Oh my goodness. Think of some of the other possibilities. I mean, was Seiji Ozawa's Gurra-Lieder probably considered the best recording of that work, short of the digital version done by Riccardo Schai, which is also superb, but it's digital. Was that recorded 4-track or 8-track? Can you imagine Gurra-Lieder coming out in this new version? It's so exciting. One of the things I'm really thrilled about, is the fact that this is being curated by Dominic Fife, who has a real, I think, both intellectual and emotional relationship with the Decca back catalogue. Decca had done in recent years some really beautiful reissues of several classic titles. I'm thinking of the Schulte Wagner Ring Cycle, the Britain War Requiem, and most recently the two great Karajan Puccini recordings of La Bohème and Madame Butterfly. Now, I reviewed the Wagner and the War Requiem, and in both cases they had to do a digital master. Quite a lot of restoration work had to be done, in particular on the Wagner Ring Cycle. And so these were released both as CD, SA-CD sets, and then as vinyl mastered from those digital masters. And I loved, in both cases, the CD, SA-CD sets, but I was not as thrilled. There was nothing particularly wrong with them, but I didn't feel they had as much life to them in the vinyl versions, which were done at Abbey Road. And a lot of people have very mixed feelings about the Abbey Road remasters. So on those projects, Dominic had contributed wonderful essays with historical background, and you just got the sense that he has a real awareness of the catalogue, where it's been, its historical importance, that he has a real love for what is in the Decca catalogue. And on these new releases, he is writing his own new essays, sort of putting the records into historical perspective, giving some extra technical and historical background. And I've read his essay for the Rite of Spring that's coming up, and it's a beautiful essay. And I'm really, really happy that he's doing that. And hint, hint, Deutsche Grammophon, maybe they might consider doing something similar. I know the reasons why they do it in their own purist way, but maybe it's something for them to consider. So I feel very, very optimistic about this Decca Pure Analog series. I think it's a game changer. Again, it's a label taking control of its own heritage. I think Dominic is going to make some really great choices in terms of what titles to release. I wouldn't be at all surprised if, like Deutsche Grammophon, he's a little bit cautious at the beginning, going for the more mainstream guaranteed hit titles. But I'm hoping that as we all start buying these records, and we really should, I'm hoping that as he goes along, he, like Deutsche Grammophon, starts to get a little bit more adventurous. I think one of the real exciting areas of the original Soul series has been when they ventured away from the tried and true, doing stuff like the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time, doing the Karajan, Schoenberg, Webern, which, as I thought it would, sold out really quickly. You can still find it around, but try and go get it quickly, because it's not going to be around forever. I'm hoping maybe they'll reissue, that might be the one box set they'll reissue, or maybe do the records separately. I think if the Decca Pure Analog series really dives deep into the Decca catalogue, into the Philips catalogue, no one saw that coming. This is going to be amazing. And I will say the other thing very quickly is the records, unlike the original Source series, will be pressed at Palace. For those of you who may have had some problems with the optimal pressings, and many of you have not had any problems, it will be interesting to do the comparison between Palace and optimal. The hope here is that a little bit of competition between the two pressing plants will push them to do their very best work in both cases. But really, what can I say in conclusion is just to say that this is one of the most exciting times for classical collectors. As these two series continue, as Chad's series gets going, I'm hoping that Sony and EMI Warner will take note. Both of them have amazing treasures in their catalog, and wouldn't it be great if they saw the light and started doing their own all analog vinyl reissues. So there we go. I've gone on a little bit here, but there's so much to talk about and it's all so exciting. Do follow all the coverage that's going to be in Tracking Angle. There's also going to be a conversation, hopefully we're setting it up at the moment this coming Monday, on the Jazz Bums site. The Classical Bums will be reuniting. That's going to be myself, Michael Johnson, and Greg of Flowering Spikes, who's now got his own record store. We're going to be getting together to talk about all of this stuff and more, hopefully this coming Monday, the 10th. Stay tuned for details. It's also exciting. Go out, buy records. It's just a thrill. Thank you so much for staying with me through this extended conversation. And wow, what a wonderful time for all of us. Happy listening and good night.